Your Royal Highnesses Crown Prince Haakon and Crown Princess Mette-Marit, the Mayor of Oslo, Global Dignity Country Chairs, ladies and gentlemen, dear all, it is an honor for me to welcome you all to tonight's seminar here at the Nobel Peace Center. My name is Liv Astrid Sverige, and I'm the Deputy Director here at the Center. Tonight's seminar, Democratic Values at Risk, asks how we can hold on to fundamental human values in a time of polarization and conflict. This is also the essence of the more than 100-year-old story of Alfred Nobel's will and the Nobel Peace Prize. The stories of the 126 Nobel Peace Prize laureates are stories of people and organizations holding on and fighting for fundamental human values. Yesterday, it was 27 years since the iconic Nelson Mandela could vote in South Africa's first post-apartheid elections. Tellingly, he called his autobiography A Long Walk to Freedom. Hence, as an inspiration for tonight's seminar, let me share with you his words about optimism and the need to keep faith in humanity. He said, "I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair." So with these words by Mandela, I hope you'll have an inspirational evening with all of us here at the Nobel Peace Center. And it's an honor for me to introduce to all of you Thomas Horn, the manager of Global Dignity Norway. Please, Thomas.
Thank you, Liv Astrid. It's a pleasure to see this crowd. It's so full here tonight. We can't get anybody more into the space. That's wonderful. It is wonderful that you have all come here to join us in this debate about a very challenging topic. We are obviously not the only ones debating how extremism is a threat to human rights and democratic values, and how we can face this threat without compromising those values. But I hope that maybe with tonight's discussion, and also with dignity as a framework for how we approach this in turbulent times, I hope maybe we can shed some new light. Some new light on the basic and hopefully also unifying values that we can use as a compass when we navigate in this difficult area. So to help us get started with this debate, I would like to ask Sven Mollekleiv to join me on the stage. Sven is a key figure in the Norwegian humanitarian environment. He is the chairman of the board of Global Dignity in Norway. Most prominently, he is the president of the Norwegian Red Cross, and he is the director of social corporate responsibility in DNVGL, which is one of the biggest companies in Norway. And Sven is going to give us the broad humanitarian perspective before we get started on the debate. Thank you, Sven.
Thank you very much. Your Majesties, dear friends, thank you very much for caring. Thank you very much for knowing that human rights is something we have to lift up and care for every day. You show us the power of voluntarism. And I have to tell you that I get motivated when I meet volunteers. Volunteers that very often lives in the midst of the misery themselves. Volunteers that often risk their own lives to save others. Volunteers that recognize the needs, learn from the experiences, and above all, see the results. Because there are a lot of results, not only locally in the world today. There has been a fantastic fall in poverty. Hunger is declining. Health inequality is falling. And the people that got access to clean water and to education is increasing. And child mortality is in decline. But not everything is in progress. Since the year 2010, the number of people that are killed or affected by war and conflicts is increasing. Afghanistan, South Sudan, Somalia, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Central African Republic, Congo. I could continue. And in addition to that, the climate change is already here. The number of people affected by natural disasters is increasing. And they have to leave because of more drought, more floods, and also stronger winds. And when people have to leave to survive, they need someone to care, but also someone to facilitate that it is possible for them also to be a resource in their own lives and in others. That has to do with treating people with dignity. And give them the chance also to be listened to be respected, and also to make a difference in their own and other people's life. And that is what human rights and dignity actually is all about. It can be someone that right now is crossing the front line in Aleppo, attacked by new grenades, and where a new hospital was destroyed and 14 people killed today. A hospital supported by Red Cross and by Médecins Sans Frontières, but with the people of Syrian Arab Red Crescent Society present on all sides of the front line. It can be Stefania that meet the people arriving at the island of Lesbos and giving the vital information that make them less vulnerable for traffickers and smugglers. It can be Adam, a refugee himself, coming from Palestine and meeting refugees when they cross the border of Norway, and help them with dignity and use his skills. Not only his first aid skills, but the fact that he knows the language. He knows the culture, so he's a good interpreter. And he can help people in so that they can become a resource and not only be someone that always needs to care for. And in this situation, we really need that the society, the international community at all, stand up for international humanitarian law, built up for over more than 150 years, human rights and refugee law. And we have to do that and to refuse that people compromise with those minimum standards of human rights and solidarity when they find it suitable. It takes decades or even centuries to build up those standards, but it can easily be destroyed if we are not there and remember why we want to fight for them. And we have to demand that all states follow up their own laws and follow up the standards they have signed for. And we should also know that to see that that becomes a reality, we have to challenge ourselves daily, because we are the ones that can make a difference. We are the ones that can show what voluntarism and humanity is actually all about, individually. And with a chain of people that can make a difference as a collective, we can create a society where people do not only survive, but where they have the opportunity to live in dignity. And it can be challenging. It can be challenging when you feel uncertain. It can be challenging when you have to communicate with people doing wrong things. And I tell you, crossing the front lines in all the war and the conflicts for nearly 30 years, I've been sitting with them. The people that do wrong things, but you have to negotiate to get access to the people in need. Yes, we have contact with ISIS, with Boko Haram, with Shabab. Otherwise the people in desperate need would not got the help they need. But we have to behave along the same values we want the world and other ones to behave. Otherwise we will become like the ones we will try to fight. So we must never lose the sight of what dignity is all about daily. So dear friends, please remember, no one can care for everyone, but everyone can care for someone. So please let us do that together and show the power of humanity in daily life. Thank you so much for caring.
Thank you, Sven. Our next speaker is very well known to the Norwegians in the audience tonight. He has been a veteran in the Norwegian public debate. He is one of Norway's most prominent experts on extremism. He has his doctoral degree in philosophy. He's been the Secretary General of the Norwegian Humanist Association and is today Associate Professor at the Oslo and Akershus University as a college. It's an honor to welcome Lars Gule on stage. Thank you, Lars. The scene is yours.
Thank you very much. Your Royal Highnesses, ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to say something about how extremism and terror involves violations of dignity and human rights and democratic principles. And extremism is a much used word today. We hear it all the time. We have a lot of synonyms for this term. Exciting, dangerous, violent, radical, fanaticism, even activism. So, when we are trying to clarify the meaning of the word and the concept in our context, I find it useful to look at the etymology of the word, the history of the word. And it is, of course, as so many words in our European languages, from Greek or Latin, this means the utmost, the furthest, the last part. It's the end of of a line. So we're also talking about a geometrical metaphor, which means that if we are using this word as a concept, it is a relational concept. We cannot understand what is extreme unless we understand what it is extreme in relation to. Which means that in order to define, identify, which we need to do if we see extremism as a problem, in a proper way, we actually need to define the center. What the extreme is extreme in relation to. Otherwise, we don't understand the concept at all. So, We need to define the center. And we do have everyday conceptions about what is the center, what is normal, what is mainstream. And that's a useful starting point. But if we end up there, we'll have a totally relativistic concept. Then it can mean that, okay, the majority today thinks this is okay, this is normal, so everything else is extreme. Let me give you an example. In the 60s, long hair on boys became popular with the Beatles and pop music. That was considered extreme. It was so extreme that principals at school sent the pupils home. Don't come back until you have a proper hairdo. Today, we can accept almost everything. No hair, extremely long hair. It is no longer extreme. And that shows us that, what goes for normal or common or sensible is not a sufficient point of departure. We need something more stable, something less relativistic. And we are not talking about any kind of extremism. We're not talking about dangerous sports, for example. Well, it's not normal to parachute jump or other forms of sport that people would say this is dangerous and therefore it is extreme and it's not something everyone will do. That's not our area. Our area, our field of interest here is the normative world. We are concerned about exactly those things that relates to dignity. So it means that we are talking about moral, ethical, juridical, and political norms. And then we have to look what sort of moral, ethical, juridical, or political norms can be used as a center, as the baseline, so that we can judge if something is extreme or not. Well, we need norms that are well justified and have wide acceptance. Yet that is a starting point. It sounds like what is common, but I will show you that it is not common. Because these norms that I'm talking about are exactly human dignity, human rights, and democratic principles. They are the center. They are norms well argued for, and I wouldn't say universally recognized, but fairly well globally recognized, although many times in their breach. So, then we can define extremism as positions that strongly deviates from, i.e. demonstrates willingness to violate human dignity, human rights, and democratic principles. So the question I was asked to respond to is that extremism is a violation of human dignity. If we are in a situation where we see the violation of human dignity, human rights, and democratic principles, we know that we are facing extremism. That is what extremism is. Yeah, but that goes without saying. So, well, it doesn't go without saying. Because when I say generally accepted, it means that they have been discussed and they have been accepted, excuse me, accepted by competent assemblies, national assemblies, United Nations, General Assembly, and so on. So we have a number of conventions, and they are legally as well as morally binding, but are they respected? No, and many people think that it's not necessary to respect these. And I think it is an outrage that we have, at this time, an American presidential candidate who is saying that it is okay to waterboard, and he would even find better ways of torturing suspects in the war on terror. That is extremism. It is extremism. Because if there is one human right that is absolutely non-negotiable, it is the prohibition against torture. It doesn't matter if the American public opinion is behind the presidential candidate. And they were. When waterboarding was introduced, there was up to 80% of the American population supporting it. No less extreme, my friends. So if we think extreme is what the others are doing, we are wrong. If we are willing to contemplate discrimination against someone because we don't like their ideas, their religion, we are violating human dignity, we are violating human rights and democratic principles. So extremism is much closer at home than we like to think of. It doesn't mean that we don't have serious challenges with extremely violent, extremely undemocratic groups. We do. And those threats against human dignity, against human rights and democratic principles are increasing. But we should not think that our response could be the violation of the same dignity, the same rights that even the worst extremists also have. So, we have all a duty to defend human rights, democracy, in order to defend human dignity. Because we have no better guard against violation of human dignity than the human rights that we have established over the last 6-7 decades. And the threat against these democratic principles and human rights, and therefore against human dignity, is a constant threat. So the challenges are there, but we also have the tools to defend our human dignity by exactly defending, upholding human rights and democratic principles. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. It's a pleasure to introduce the next speaker. Anine H.R.H. is a lawyer. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the Norwegian Center for Human Rights, and she has stood out in the recent years as a brave and exceptionally concise advocate for human rights in general, and especially the freedom of speech. Anine received the Norwegian Research Council's Award for Excellence in Communication of Science for, and I quote, her ability to explain complex problems simply, clearly, and concise. So we're looking forward to that, Anine. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Royal Highnesses, here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for that very flattering introduction. I'll be hard-pressed to try and live up to that, but I'll do my best in answering the topic that I've been asked to speak on, which is, are we in danger of compromising democratic principles and human rights in the fight against extremism and terror? Now, the short answer to this is yes. But I'll try and give you a slightly longer one to substantiate that, yes. Before doing that, I'll have to take a step back, I think, from Professor Gule's introduction and try and contemplate a little bit what kinds of values and rights we are talking about. So democracy, obviously, is ruled by the demos, ruled by the people, by popular majority, institutionalized in some way, orderly and predictable, that we can all trust. And the carrying word here is trust. This system also needs to represent us in a way that actually enable us, or at least give us the possibility to have an equal say in that system. And the way of doing that, obviously, is through free and fair and secret elections. So human rights, it's a little big topic for a brief introduction, but human rights obviously are rights that all human beings are entitled to just from being human beings. So not being just citizens of a state that provide rights to them. This concept is a universal concept that we think that people are inherently possessing these rights, regardless of states. They are also protected legally and politically. Legally through both supranational instruments, such as human rights conventions, and nationally through constitutions. So the opening question, are we compromising these democratic values, principles, and human rights in our fight against terror? Just to focus a little bit on the word compromise, because the essence, I think, of all kinds of politics, both in good times and in challenging times, is to compromise. So we will try and optimize the values and the rights that we think are the most fundamental, but they are sometimes irreconcilable. And the sort of paradigmatic collision between values and rights here is the topic for today, namely the need for security on the one hand, and our personal freedom and liberty on the other hand. So I can't just go out to Gardermoen, our main airport, and walk straight in and onto the flight. I need to go through security because we want to keep our flights as secure as they can be. That compromises my right to move freely, obviously, and my privacy, to some extent, is compromised by walking through the metro station, particularly during night times when the surveillance cameras are on all the time. Now, they're there to ensure that we can all travel safely on the metro, but they're still monitoring me, who are not doing anything wrong, right? So that's the challenge with the state and its citizens in that sense. You also have these compromises between citizens. I can't say defaming things to another person or give out the details of his private life, even though I have freedom of expression, because then I'll compromise his freedom or his right to privacy. So this is a classical dilemma, the freedom-safety balance, and it's in some ways, I think, inherent in all social and democratic theory. We give up some freedom to gain a system that can take care of us and ensure us both the liberties and the public security that we need. So this is sort of also the liberal constitutional ideal. We constitute our branches of power through the Constitution. We give them that power through the Constitution, but we also limit their powers through the Constitution because we constitutionalize our rights into that Constitution, and we say we need freedom of speech, we need freedom to privacy, we need fair trials, we need a number of human rights, and our rulers, please go ahead and rule us within those limits, but within those limits. But so, what are the challenges to this balancing process today, the particular challenge today? So from the outside, obviously, it's today's topic. It's extremism, it's terrorism, which is, in essence, anti-democratic. It's threatening all democratic principles and human rights simply by wanting to threaten them, wanting to replace them with something else, dictatorship, authoritarian rule. But this threat, which comes from the outside, sometimes from the inside too, we have terrorists within our borders. We can be terrorists. But the threat, I think, from the inside that's most interesting in today's subject is the challenge that was framed, or at least one layer of it, framed by a Norwegian philosopher called H.R.H, which is called the liberal dilemma. How do we defend our liberal values against illiberal threats? Threats that don't only not play by the rules, but also have as their objective to destroy the rules and replace it with something else. Can we defend ourselves against that while still holding on to our liberal values, our democratic values, our human rights? So that's a big challenge. And I think one particular challenge that I'm going to dwell on a little bit today is the issue of surveillance, because that's the way we're trying to ensure our security in meeting with these challenges, with the terrorist threats. So the sort of modern reawakening of this is an old dilemma too, obviously. How wide enabling laws are we giving to the police, for instance, for them to supervise and try and keep us secure? The modern reawakening of this trend comes in the wake of 9/11 in 2001, after which, after 45 days after the attack, the Patriot Act was enacted. And it's an enabling law that hugely expands the executive and police powers. We've seen, not in that magnitude, of course, but a rather recent European example is the Data Retention Directive, mandating all states to ensure that personal data that we all, so the traces that we all lay out from speaking on our cell phones or sending our emails, or that those data are stored, even though we have not done anything wrong or we are not suspected of planning to do anything wrong. These data are still stored for possible future purposes. So that's sort of a European equivalent of that thinking. We need to ensure ourselves the best that we can against this threat. And so we started to compromise our privacy, our personal freedom. The most recent, I guess, and the biggest sort of challenge in this respect is the NSA program PRISM that was revealed by the traitor/hero Edward Snowden, which also goes to say how far governments will go in trying to preserve security. They're giving up our security in the same movement. So big problem. In Norway, we had a recent case about a filmmaker portraying volunteers going to ISIS from Norway, growing up in Norway, deciding to join the ISIS instead. Portraying this, and obviously the film material that he sat on was a valuable source of evidence for the police in trying to chase terrorists. So they went in and took part of that material. It was only after the Supreme Court said you can't do that because you're compromising journalistic sources here. Who will ever talk to filmmakers like that, or journalists, or anyone about what's going on, so that they can inform us, the people, about what's going on, if you can go in and compromise journalistic sources like that? So how do we confront these challenges? That's obviously the big question. And I think we have to realize there really is no easy fix. I think to some extent there will always be an inherent tension. But I mentioned the courts, and I think they have a particular role in playing sort of the modern Socrates, who will ask our rulers about the justifications for what they're doing. Now, in order for courts to do this, obviously, we will have to have laws that protect our freedoms, and we have that in the Constitution and in the Human Rights Conventions. So that's one channel. But I think really the modern Socrates, we need to be that's a responsibility we all need to take. We all have to be that Socrates. We all have to take the challenge that is that raise public awareness about these questions. And we need to insist on transparency, I think, in the way that our rulers are trying to keep us safe. Because if they're keeping us safe in the way that they can justify to us, that's fine. We can critique it openly and maybe change some laws if they go too far. But if they insist on keeping even that secret, it's very hard for us as a demos to try and challenge and question the power that's being used, or in some instances, I think, misused. So I think I'll end on that note to call out to all of you, be aware of this dilemma and take your responsibility, every one of you, and in trying to question always what is going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Anine. Now, global dignity, we are so lucky that among the country chairs we have our own house philosopher. Pekka Himanen, Finnish professor philosophy. He graduated with his PhD at the age of 20, and I think he is still the youngest PhD graduate ever. And when asked how he managed that, well, the first year I took my master's, and the second year I took my PhD. So good luck with that, everybody. Pekka's books on the information age have been translated into more than 20 languages, and he will focus specifically on that today, the culture of dignity and how that is translated into communication culture. Also to mention, Pekka Himanen co-founded Global Dignity together with the Crown Prince Haakon and John, that you will listen to later tonight. Okay, so Pekka, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm very honored to be here. Personally, I think that you in Norway should be very proud of being very central in the global discussion on dignity. Of course, what the Nobel Peace Center here is doing, but also the kind of conversation that your Crown Prince has been starting, involving many other peoples who are actually, many of them, present here, as I can see. In Global Dignity, we have now been active in over 60 countries on 6 continents. Over 1 million people have participated. We have country chairs in over 50 countries now. In addition, our 2 board members, honorary board members, Desmond Tutu and President Martti Ahtisaari, are Nobel Peace laureates that have been discussing dignity very much. For example, President Ahtisaari has this one formulation of what the goal must be. He uses this expression that it is lasting peace with dignity for all. This is what he is about. And the only way that you can start that process towards that end is to get people to have a real encounter with each other. There's also an academic conversation going on dignity, including recently I published with my colleague Manuel Castells a book by Oxford University Press called Reconceptualizing Development in the Global Information Age, and their central idea is to take dignity as a goal of development. So there's an expanding global discussion related to dignity, and that's why it's so central that we are together here discussing that. I was asked to talk specifically on how could dignity relate to the communication culture in the social media, and I will give a few thoughts related to that. In the spirit, of course, that I'm a really strong proponent of free speech. So don't take me in a sense that I would believe that it's possible to give some absolute general rules for free speech. With that remark, I start. So, dignity, it's a concept that has been very central in the history of philosophy, in the Renaissance, in the Enlightenment, during the last century, and of course now. The most simple starting point is the word. Dignity comes from the Latin word dignitas, which means worthiness, which comes from the word dignus, which means worth. So the key idea there is everyone's inalienable, inherent worth as human beings and respecting that. Why we chose to add the word global in global dignity was that it is one of the few values that really unite people, that are shared in different cultures. In fact, it's a core value in the world's religions and also secular philosophy. For example, dignity is a core idea in Immanuel Kant's famous categorical imperative. And one formulation of this imperative is this: act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. In another place, he has a little bit more to say linked to dignity. I will quote this one paragraph. Every human being has a legitimate claim to respect from his fellow human beings and is in turn bound to respect every other. Humanity itself is a dignity, for a human being cannot be used merely as a means by any human being, either by others or even by himself, but must always be used at the same time as an end. But just as he cannot give himself away for any price, this would conflict with his duty of self-esteem, so neither can he act contrary to the equally necessary self-esteem of others as human beings. That is, he is under obligation to acknowledge in practical way the dignity of humanity and every other human being. Hence, there rests on him a duty regarding the respect that must be shown to every other human being. Well, this is actually surprisingly relevant to our discussion today related to the communication culture. But like I said, it's not only in the history of philosophy that we find this key idea of dignity, but it's also in all major religions of the world. Kind of operationalized idea of dignity. Of course, in Judaism, I'm quoting, there's this idea of what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. Of course, in Christianity, do to others what you would have them to do you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. In Islam, not one of you is a believer until he desires for his brother what he desires for himself. In the East, Hinduism, do not to others which, if done to thee, would cause thee pain. This is the sum of duty. Buddhism, hurt not others in ways that you would find hurtful. And Confucianism, Che Kung asked, is there one word that can serve as a principle of conduct for life? Confucius replied, it is the word shu, reciprocity. Do not impose on others what you yourself don't desire. So we have one theme that is uniting traditions globally. And now, if we take this to this more specific topic of communication culture and especially social media, I want to formulate three very short, perhaps quite practical ideas. There's a well-known expression according to which on the internet nobody knows that you are a dog. This is an idea that of course refers to the anonymity of internet users. But I would complete this sentence by saying that just because on the internet nobody knows you're a dog, that doesn't mean that you should behave like one there. So, internet cannot be an area where we have a different set of values. Or like that dignity applies to our real face-to-face world, but not to some other area. It's an inalienable value that cannot be disappeared anywhere online either. So for me, the operationalization of it is that you should actually think of how you would treat the other face-to-face. And not do anything to the other that you wouldn't be ready to do face-to-face. So we know what kind of examples we meet there. Which is, in translation to the language of Immanuel Kant, not to ever treat another only as your means, whatever your project is in which you are treating the other that way, but always as an end in itself, that is, as a person with dignity. So it's kind of, the first idea is, I give it a Latin name, well, it's this face-to-face criterion, so ad faciem, which means to the face-to-face. And the dignity check is there, that what kind of a person would behave this way face-to-face. Often we don't have any difficulty kind of seeing what this is about when we move it to our real life. That what if someone would start behaving that way? For example, here in this discussion, well, maybe we would give some psychiatric diagnosis. The second point is that in the social media, the conversation falls surprisingly often from the issue to the personal level. And this is known, of course, argumentum ad hominem. Ad hominem is the second point. If ad faciem was the first one, F-A-C-I-E-M. So ad hominem, where you are arguing with the person instead of the issue. But it's very rarely justified to argue with the person instead of the issue. So, respecting here the other as an end itself and including a relevance check to what you are contributing. How is this relevant to the issue at hand that is said? And then the final point, well, everyone also knows that one way of violating another's person's dignity is telling the other person what he thinks. It is, we know it, and it's very difficult. And I've coined a term for this type of argument. It's argumentum ad fictionem. So you are arguing with your own fiction. So basically you are arguing with yourself, but you somehow want to involve the other's name in that discussion. So the practical side is fact-checking, not claiming about another something that you haven't thoroughly fact-checked. So if we are to have a real encounter between people that President Ahtisaari talked about, a communication culture of dignity is needed, at least generally speaking. Since there will be exceptions, I find it appropriate to end this by quoting at the Nobel Peace Center one of its other laureates, a pioneer of internet philosophy, Mother Teresa, which is a text called Anyway, which is said that was on the wall of her orphanage in India, even if she hadn't written it herself. But this text goes this way. Anyway, people are unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Love them anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish ulterior motives. Do good anyway. If you are successful, you win false friends and true enemies. succeed anyway. The good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Honesty and frankness make you vulnerable. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spent years building may be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. People really need help, but may attack you if you do help them. Help people anyway. Give the world the best you have, and you'll get kicked in the teeth. Give the world the best you've got anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pekka. Now we have gotten the broad picture, and we've touched upon extremism and humanism in a more general way. What I would like to do now is to give you a little surprise, not on the program. What do you do if the extremism is a 16-year-old boy that stands just in front of you in flesh and bone? We want to have a concrete example, and we are so lucky that we have Sara Salva here today. Please join me on stage. Sara is managing Vibro, which is an organization in Norway working with youth, presenting alternative role models for youth. And in their work, they have several very concrete examples of how to work with youth that are at risk of being radicalized. So please, Sara, the floor is yours.
Hello, Your Royal Highnesses. I work with youth on a daily basis. As we all know, they're the most vulnerable group in society. When I ask them what they value most about the work they do, the answer is people. The people they interact with, the people they engage with, and the relations they form. We work to engage them in societal issues, so they work with us. And the fact that Vibro, the organization that I work for and lead, is a family, it feels like home. Our work is founded upon the firm belief that all children and young ones have great potential. And we intend to bring out that potential by inspiring them, motivating them, and teaching them skills, giving them the tools they need in order to succeed. With us, they learn how to make a marketing strategy, how to organize an event like a festival or a debate, how to produce a magazine. This because we believe it is key to fight social immobility. All our projects are aimed at fighting social inequality. This because, as we have seen in Norway, the major reason for radicalization is often marginalization, not being seen. It's not the continuation of a group's political ideas. We also work to promote role models with multicultural background. We believe that in order to strengthen our democratic society, our children and young ones with different backgrounds need to have someone to look up to that resemble themselves. In Vibro, we work with about 60 young ones every day in different projects, and we meet about 5,000 during a year. But there are thousands and thousands that we do not meet. And my last point will be that we, as the civil society, the school, the parents, we need to be the safe haven our children and young ones need, because we have seen that it works. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we will have a short panel discussion, and I would like to ask the panelists to please join me on stage. The last speaker that we will introduce today is Puti Mahaniele. Puti Manielu will join the previous speakers in the panel. Puti is the global dignity country chair of South Africa. She is a businesswoman from South Africa, but not just any businesswoman. She was named by Forbes magazine in 2014 to be the Africa's businesswoman of the year. So please, Puti, Pekka, Anina and Lars, can you please join me on stage? And in addition to that, no, please come on. There's space for everybody. In addition, we are very lucky to have Crown Prince Haakon to moderate the debate. So I will let you know when it's time for the audience to get the microphone, more or less. Yeah? If you now could start to think of comments or intricate questions for the panel, please do so, and I will try to make us as much time for this as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. First of all, what fantastic presentations. I was very much enjoying listening to all of you. But I'll start with you, Puti. You have an extensive background, both as a businesswoman from South Africa, but you've also been working with many issues and like, for instance, you're a patron of the National Education Empowerment Trust in South Africa. You've worked a lot with young professionals. Now, you've been listening to the topic here, and I guess also Africa has been very much been affected by extremism and terror, regrettably. But what is your take on the African perspective, and maybe in particular the South African perspective when it comes to these issues?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Prince Haakon, and thank you to all of you. We certainly have seen a significant amount of extremism in Africa as well. I mean, just in Nigeria, it was mentioned with the Chibok girls who were, kidnapped by the Boko Haram. And then also when you look at South Africa with the apartheid regime that we suffered under for many years, up until 1994 when we had the new democracy. And many other places around the African continent, we have seen a significant amount of extremism. I mean, I was just in Rwanda last year, and just looking at the history that they have around the genocide that happened right there. So there has been a significant amount of it. But, I think the biggest issue becomes what we can do after that. In South Africa, what happened was that we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which looked at the truth behind the stories, and try to find solutions for people as they move forward, because many people had lost many members of their families. In Rwanda, they also had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and many other countries around the African continent have had TRCs. And so it's really about the life that you can create beyond that. In the South African experience, it's actually been 22 years. Just yesterday, it was a celebration of 22 years of the new democracy. And, it's looking at what we've been able to establish since then. What has happened is that the new government has built a number of new homes, because many of the TRC victims were coming from shacks, were not living in the right environment for human beings. They've also built a number of new schools and all of this, but obviously none of it is enough. You can imagine that with all the atrocities that have been happening around the African continent, many people were coming into South Africa as well. And so the government has had to deal with that, being able to provide those services, not only to South Africans, but to other people around the African continent who were in South Africa as well. And so from that perspective, it's been difficult to meet the requirements that were needed in South Africa. But, whilst I know that there's a lot of criticism for the work that the government has done, I know that a significant amount of capital has gone into it. And in fact, South Africa has the biggest budget for dealing with some of the social issues that we face, whether it is in housing, in education, and all of these issues. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Unfortunately, what often happens in these types of situations is that in trying to deal with the atrocities, you can sometimes create issues, other issues develop. So, for example, there was a concept of black economic empowerment that was introduced in South Africa. And in terms of black economic empowerment, as a black person, I could go and acquire an equity share. I could acquire share into a business and become a shareholder in that business. And the idea behind this was for black South Africans to become more economically active in the economy of South Africa.
Did it work? Was it a success?
And it worked to an extent, but unfortunately, as it happens in business, there was also a number of opportunists. So somebody who's not qualified in a particular industry goes and takes advantage of that opportunity and gets somebody else who is not supposed to be participating to help them with it. So for example, what you would find is that there's a big contract in engineering. Because I'm black, I apply for it. I put in a good price for the service, and then I go and I get another company, an established company, to do the work for me. And they give me a fee for it. So unfortunately, there was a number of those atrocities where people abused this and enriched themselves in the process. But having said that, I was fortunate to work for an organization that I think differentiated itself, because there was a number of organizations that did good work, where we not only looked at creating value for the shareholders in our business, but we also worked on making sure that we had an impact in society. And our focus was on education. And so we were able to educate millions of young people, and we did that through building of new schools and building science laboratories and all of these required facilities in schools. So, with any process, as governments try to instill the right processes, you will find there will be mistakes, because it's humanity that we're dealing with.
And okay, so housing and education.
Yes.
But
Health.
I wanted to health.
Yes.
But I wanted to go back a little bit to the reconciliation process after apartheid.
Yes.
What can you name a few examples of what really worked, and how is that still working today?
Yeah. So in housing, we've had, oh my goodness, it's been a significant number of new homes that have been built in South Africa for people that were living in government-owned homes. So what happened was that the old government had built certain homes for the black populations, and so people could own those homes in terms of the old government. But what the new government did was that they started to build more civilized homes for people to own. And so they started with that program. It also had difficulties because of some of these issues that I mentioned, where there was a bit of corruption here and there. But over time, many millions of homes were built for South Africans, so that was a success. I think another great success was that at a period, there was a time where we had great difficulty with the scourge of AIDS. And there was a political regime that we had which believed that AIDS did not cause death. That it was curable.
Yes, I remember.
And so, when fortunately we had a change in that thinking and in government as well. And so, we were able to then get access to medication for people who had HIV, and so that they would not necessarily become affected by the AIDS disease. And in fact, today what we find is that we have millions of people who are HIV positive, but they're living much longer lives than people who have not been exposed to HIV. And so it's been a very, very, very successful program that we've had in South Africa with that illness. And so we've had a number of successes, but there's still a long road to go.
Yeah. Thank you, Puri. I would like to open it up for the panel now. So We've talked quite a bit about the issues, but I want to now focus on solutions. So we have polarization. We have extremes on each pole. How do we make sure that we strengthen the middle, the constructive middle? How do we use language? What type of actions really work so that we build bridges instead of just feeding into the extremes confrontation with each other? Anyone want to take a stab at that one? Sure, Lars.
To avoid polarizing and stigmatizing language is absolutely essential. And of course, dehumanizing language is out of the question. That is a violation of human dignity in itself. But we see that from the extremes, and here comes the internet, from the dark corners of the internet, this sort of language is creeping into mainstream public political discourse. And that is a real danger, a real danger. I don't have, unfortunately, good answers. I can point out some of the problems and I can give general answers, but specific answers is very difficult to give because it also is a question of how do we handle these new tools? And we are in the process of learning. Maybe the next generation will be better able to use social media, all the possibilities, opportunities that follows from modern technology and the internet. But at least each and every one of us could try to be more aware of our own language and avoid polarizing, stigmatizing, and dehumanizing language.
Well, as a free speech advocate, obviously, I'm sometimes posed with this sort of paradox. Can we do this? Because I totally agree. Can we do this? Can we achieve this? That to have people speak in a more proper language and not such a degrading language, and still protect free speech. And I think certainly the way to obtain this is not through legal regulations. But I think you can give at least a philosophical and I think commonly acceptable argument from a free speech way of thinking for limiting that kind of speech. And that is a central reason to protect free speech is that we want as much speech out there as possible, right? We're fallible human beings. We know we can be wrong. We need to have all those voices out there in the marketplace of ideas to collide with each other so that we can get those good ideas to survive. But if we don't curb that kind of language, we'll not get that diversity out in the marketplace of ideas. We'll get a less well-stocked marketplace. So unless we try from sort of the civil society way of curbing that language, we will not have as much free speech benefits as we want from protecting free speech.
Pekka?
Yes, I think that the way we raise our young, how we integrate dignity as a value in our education system is very central. And I believe that was very central also in the South African experience, because there was really not a culture of dignity before Mandela and Desmond Tutu. And part of the reconciliation process was, well, I will use an example that Desmond Tutu once told. He said in our discussion that the hardest part in the whole apartheid system was not the poverty or the hunger, even if it was miserable and wrong. The hardest part was when your basic dignity as a human being was violated. For example, for him personally, when he was with his very young daughter at the beach, and then the daughter saw some other kids also playing there and said that I also want to go play with them. And then the father had to tell his daughter that, I'm sorry, darling, but you cannot go there because you are not that kind of a child. And that, he said, broke his heart. And that was where South Africa was only about 20 years ago. But you have been building this kind of culture of dignity that is also rooted in the education system, and it has had real life results. So that is at least one fundamental part of the whole. Of course, it is not a simple challenge.
Thank you. Puti, I wanted to also bring in your sector, because you're from business
Yes.
and finance.
Yes.
How is business part of the solution or part of the problem? Or rather, how can we make business part of the solution rather than part of the problem, both related to this and related to poverty alleviation?
Yeah. I think business can be part of the solution. You know, if business was part of the solution in the South African context, you would see a lot more capital going towards dealing with the social ills in the country. The reality is that the government has been the one putting in the most capital in dealing with those issues. We haven't seen a significant amount of private sector organizations going and saying, let's go and help with building homes, or let's go and help with building schools, or let's go, you know. Rather, what they've tended to do is to do what they are required to do. And so there hasn't been much coming out of the private sector. And often when you talk to CEOs, you know, they'll tell you, well, you know, shareholders, the board, and all of this. But the reality, I think, it comes to culture as well, you know, on the board. You know, if there is this culture of knowing that there ought to be something that we are doing to make a difference in the lives of the people that work for this organization or who are the clients or customers of this organization, there ought to be that culture of giving out. But no, we haven't seen that much coming from the private sector, but there is the capability to do more, absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to call on a couple of the people from the audience as well, because there are some perspectives there that I would like to ask you to give. The first is Mina Al-Araibi. She's an Iraqi British journalist. She's been also helping out with Global Dignity for quite a few years. You're a political analyst, and especially on Middle East issues. So I wondered maybe you could stand up and just give us a short perspective and a few things that you think are important on how we can move forward in a constructive way.
Thank you for this opportunity. I don't know if I should be facing the panel or the audience.
I think the audience probably is a good way of going.
Okay, well, thank you for this opportunity. Just briefly, I was given the challenge of thinking of solutions rather than telling you about all the problems. I'm from Iraq originally, living in Britain for many years, but also with many deep connections to Syria, family connections, and many memories and love for Syria. So I want to give you solutions rather than pour my heart out to you here. So solutions. The first thing is, we are all individuals, and we are all the sum of our individual experiences. When I get asked, are you Sunni or Shia? It is because people think they can pigeonhole my politics according to that. They know very little about what my religion means to me. So think about why you're asking that question. Respect the fact that we are all individuals. And I think sometimes people ask these questions without meaning to be insensitive or condescending, but it actually comes across quite often that way. But my second point about the solution is, do ask questions, which contradicts my first solution. But ask sensitive questions and also give the time to hear the response. So don't just be listening to the fiction that you want to hear, but also make the time. Some of the most frustrating things, you're at a cocktail party, somebody has a glass in their hand, they're speaking to you for 30 seconds, and say to you, so as an Iraqi, was life better under Saddam or is it better now? Really? You think I'm going to explain? the last 40 years that Iraq has gone through in 30 seconds, it shows very little respect. And I guess my third solution is to remember, all of us, that many of the refugees that are coming to Europe, and I was once a refugee and my family sought refuge in Europe, are here because they're escaping the very extremism that is hitting Syria, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, and others. To truly remember that, not just to say it in a charitable way, but to truly remember that they are rejecting those very ideas and trying to find the safety and security that we're blessed to have here. At the same time, to remember that, of course, we do face threats, but we have to believe that we are all innocent until proven guilty, rather than thinking that some people are guilty by association rather than being innocent.
Thank you, Mina. Well done. The second person I would like to call upon is Asanga Abayagun Asekera. It's quite a challenge to pronounce your last name, Asanga. But Asanga is from Sri Lanka. He's been advisor to minister in government. Asanga is a computer scientist, but I'd very much like to hear your perspective from Sri Lanka, also because you've worked and had a very central role, despite your young age, in the post-Civil War reconciliation process. So you're also our country chair for Sri Lanka, but please say a few words on this topic from your perspective. Solutions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Your Highness. I think the Norwegians have difficult last names than ours. I really can't. Because I can't pronounce our ambassador's last name in Sri Lanka. It's very long. Yeah, I think to give you a perspective from Sri Lanka, we had a 3-decade war in Sri Lanka and we lost a lot of lives. Right now we have 40,000 widows in Sri Lanka because of this war, direct and indirect victims. Reconciliation is only hope that we have. I myself is a victim. I lost my father when I was 16 years old, and he believed in to create a peaceful society and give rights to the Tamil minority. But unfortunately there was a suicide attempt and they killed him. And so I think many lives were taken in Sri Lanka, politicians, public figures, and this was because they didn't listen to the people. For example, I mean, even my father was an extremist. He was an extremist because he was in prison in 1982. He was trying to tell the government, you are doing something wrong. You have to work with the Tamilians. You have to engage with them. And what you're doing is completely wrong. So they locked him up. And there was a letter sent from Nelson Mandela. He exchanged letters from prison to prison. And there was a letter sent from my father to Mandela, and Mandela has sent a card. And in the card it says, the struggle will continue and the victory is certain at the end. So which means they were extremists, but they wanted something better for the society. They wanted, because they ignored the Sri Lankan factor actually. It became worse and worse year by year. And at the end, there was no reconciliation. They didn't want to talk about reconciliation. So right now, I think language is a powerful tool which we can use for reconciliation. I did the role of education for reconciliation. How can education help reconciliation? So I think bringing in dignity to the curriculum, teaching people about respect, ethnic groups, other religious groups, that's really important. So we want to draw experience from Rwanda, South Africa, and other countries too. So we need to work together. And there's a huge community, even in Norway and in other parts also, a Tamilian community. So we need to work. I have forgiven my the perpetrators who assassinated my father. I'm talking to them now. I'm talking to them. I want a solution here. I'm thinking of the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. A very powerful story. Another from one powerful story to another. Lorna Solis, she started she's the founder and CEO of Blue Rose Compass, who's an organizational partner with Global Dignity, and you work a lot with refugees and in particular on higher education. So maybe you would give your perspective as well, please.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm so inspired by my dear friends Asanga and Mina, who I love very much, and from a fellow refugee to another fellow refugee. So I was born in Nicaragua, and at 9, I fled a war and became a refugee in the US. And we were lucky that we had green cards, and my mom was able to work. My father, who was a doctor, was not able to work because he had passed the boards in Nicaragua. So my dad, with all the degrees, was now the mailman at my school. And I'm mentioning all this because we're trying to come up with solutions, specific solutions as to what we can do today. So what I do now is I have a B Corp and an NGO. The NGO provides scholarships to refugees from the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, different parts of the world, Tibetan refugees, Rohingyas, anyone who's being sought out, that's where we're at. And we get them all the way through SAT, TOEFL, into the best universities and schools all over. And I'm happy and delighted that my friend Bjarte, who's here, wait, where are you there, has helped with 5 scholarships at BI Norwegian Business School. We're going to have 5 Syrian refugees coming in the fall. We're securing that, finalizing details. But just like BI, so many other universities are taking in refugees. And these are people who, you meet them and they have PhDs, they're civil engineers, they're doctors, like my father, who was he's still, turned 90 3 weeks ago, brilliant man, and was not able to use his skills in a country where it's so abundant. And he was the mailman. And after 18 years, he went back to Nicaragua, and he was Minister of Deputy of Health, Ministry of Health, with Violeta Chamorro, the then president, who was my dad's friend since they were little kids. So he went from prominent businessman, doctor, mailman, Deputy Minister of Health. That's what happens to a refugee. So what I do is we provide the scholarships, but we also do tech training with refugees. They're building apps in Jordan. We're launching this pilot being supported by the Jordanian government, Microsoft, and we're going to hire Jordanians and Syrians. Peace building. We want people that usually are afraid of each other to work together. That is how we build peace. I'm a refugee. Do I look scary? I mean, maybe I look scary. Some people may say I look scary, but I'm not. And the thing is, I think if you just happen to get to know these people, you realize we're so the same. So I'll leave you with this. And he's like, be brief. I'm like, I'm Latin. How do you do that? I don't know how to do that. You know, so I always say, if my neighbor's not well, I'm not well. And I live in New York City, but my neighbor's Syria. So as long as Syria's not well, and Afghanistan's not well, and Somalia's not well, I'm not well. And if I can do what I do, we can all do something. So I want to leave you inspired that it doesn't matter how small your intervention, we can all do something to make this world better. We're all the same. We laugh the same, we cry the same, we have the same dreams for our children, our neighbors, etc. And we're not different at all. So let's together get inspired and do more. Thank you. I hope that was brief enough.
Okay. We would like to open the floor up for a few questions, maybe 2 questions. So we don't have a lot of time. But are there anyone that would like to?
Hello. Thanks for the extremely beautiful introductions.
You should say who you are.
I am Angela Morelli. I am Italian, married with a Norwegian, so I'm not in my own country. I am a designer. When you say that you're a designer, usually people think about pretty stuff, and but it's not that. I design complex information to make it understandable and to transform it into meaningful narratives, especially when it comes to science. But there is a point that I want to make when you ask about solutions. I think that Mina and Lorna and Asanga and Sarah actually mentioned something. When you ask people what's the most important thing to them, either they are in a disadvantaged condition or not, they can answer people. And in Norway last year, a politician called, or just like publicly said, what can we do for the refugee crisis? And that was a question posed to the health minister. And actually, a group of designers from the DOGA, which is the architectural university in Oslo, said we can help with that. Okay, so there is a very beautiful concept in Norway that is called dugnad, and it's in dugnad. I don't have the Latin etymology, but I think it has a Latin etymology, and means help. It's free help, and I think it's something that I'm learning is probably the base of democracy. So, but what happened is that in a couple of months, we started meeting in kindergarten every Sunday, about 30 designers, and we pitched the idea for organizing a dugnad workshop at Stortinget. So 100 people, private sector, public sector, academia, refugees. So we gathered together, and the task of us as designers was to design an apolitical platform to allow a conversation to happen. And of course we orchestrated it, so we designed the experience. And it was extremely successful. The workshop was called Guts to Change. The initiative was called Guts to Change. What happened was that it sparked a series of ripple effects. And I think that, of course, we have to rely on the will of every individual, but I think that we can plan and we can orchestrate discussion to go out of more polarized areas. We can do that by design. So there is science that we can rely on, so there is evidence that works. If you put off your hat that says that you are from the left or the right, or you are Italian, or you are Norwegian, you are probably can be much more open to discuss and to go down to those values that are the human values that makes us the same, basically. So what I'm saying is that, yes, to your question, can we create a space where there is no where we can stay away from polarization? My answer is yes, and we can do that by design. And we can do that by gathering together private sector, public sector, academia, and the people that are disadvantaged. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. There's one all the way back there, Thomas. So that's the last question, I'm afraid. The first one, I guess, wasn't really a question, but good comment.
Okay, well, I'll end up with a question, I promise. I'm Tarjei Helland. I work in teacher training at Oslo and Akershus University College. I'm currently working on a PhD in civic and citizenship education. And in my field, we found that in Norway, students and teachers alike tend to take democracy as a given. And this notion of democracy as a given, when paired with situations where democratic values are threatened by extremism or other ways, I think this may lead to, or at least fuel, undemocratic or at least non-democratic responses towards extremism, like Dr. Sheriff was talking about with surveillance, for example. I think this may be a result of a need for security, while at the same time, because democracy is seen as a given in our context, we are not really understanding what's at stake here, which is actually losing the very democracy that we seek to protect. So my question is, in schools, in contexts like the Norwegian, do we need, this is the question to the panel, do you think we need to embrace and even teach towards a higher degree of embracing risk-taking in order to protect our democratic values? Do we need to be blunt about the fact that no, democracy is not your safest organization of a society? It may not be your safest organization of a society, but it is the best way to protect dignity, to protect human rights, to protect the common values that we think of. Therefore, we face the risk and we accept the risk, and we are not willing to lose it. Thanks.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, which is what we say when we don't know what to answer, obviously. But as a lawyer, I'm not the right one to answer that. But I think that's a very fair point. What we're taught in school and in law school as well is that there's all the upsides of democracy, obviously. But we're never told anything about the downsides of democracy. So I think that's a very good idea. I like that.
Yeah, Lars, would you like to add to that?
Yes, because in a way it goes without saying. We live in a risk society. And in particular, if we are living in a free society, people will abuse that freedom to threaten others, to threaten the freedom, the life, security of others. And if we are trying to guard 100% against that, and today we can. We can abolish abuse of women and children in the homes. Just put a web camera in every room. No problem. Technologically, we can prevent all of that. We do not want that intervention because it reduces our freedom, which means that we simply accept a level of risk to children and so on. And that is something we do have to live with if we want to maintain freedom. Doesn't mean that we are going to sit back and accept it passively. Of course, we are having campaigns, we are arguing, we are trying to increase our moral awareness, etc., etc. And these are the methods we can use in a free society. We cannot use laws, surveillance, control, police, courts against everything that we feel threatens us. Because then we become the society that those who are undermining freedom desires.
I absolutely agree with that. I just want to take it a little bit further, because I think even though you do that, even though you put surveillance cameras in all homes and under all cupboards and everywhere, I don't think you'll get rid of it anyway. I think there's always a risk.
Always. And as wiser men than me have said, if you are seeking security at the expense of freedom, you will lose both.
Yes.
Okay.
Here, here.
Yes, I mean, life itself is very risky. So there's no such thing as risk-free life. The real question, I guess, is that how do we create conditions for a life worth living, conditions for a dignified life? And then we absolutely must follow this route that has been outlined there. I mean, democracy in general that is not based on our ability to control everything. There's in no country enough of police or military to control everyone. Democracy is ultimately based on a culture of democracy, which I would argue is very much based on the culture of dignity. So in democracy we choose to solve most of our conflicts in a peaceful manner, which reminds me, President Ahtisaari, we had a great tour here at the center before this, so I was reminded about this question that he said to use to start some discussions that in conflict, that do you want to win or do you want peace? And in democracy we want to find a solution based on that latter part.
Thank you very much. We have to shortly wrap this up. I wanted to thank Sarah for already answering my question about what we can do before we started the conversation. I wanted to thank the panelists for all the contributions that you've made today, and for everyone also in the audience that contributed. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, dear panelists. There is no such thing as a meeting or a seminar with John Bryant in the audience without actually John speaking. So he will be the lucky one getting the last word tonight. Please, John, I have 2 minutes.
You can hold that little placard all you want. Good evening. I'm sorry, I'm from the black church. I'm used to seek and respond. I'm actually talking to you. Good evening. You're all now all honorary black people. I will be quick. I want to thank the royal family for facilitating this. I want to thank the center and its staff. It doesn't get enough credit for doing this. I want to thank the mayor of your great city for being gracious and being here with us as a quiet storm, being very passionate in the background with this important message. The mayor and Thomas and his team for doing this, and the country chairs from Global Dignity. The mayor of your great city told me something that shocked me when I came in. She said that Dr. King really only got 2 letters of nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, hundreds of thousands, technically hundreds of thousands of leaders can nominate someone for a Nobel Peace Prize based on criteria, but only 2 letters came in. So it wasn't about a popularity contest. It was really about a substance arrest. An arrest, a voluntary arrest, really a voluntary calling forth of the spirit based on substance. And it didn't take, as she reminded me, millions or hundreds of thousands or even hundreds to recognize that it just took one. And sometimes it only takes one to do the right thing. So while I was sitting there, I pulled out my phone and I texted one. And her name is Bernice A. King, Dr. Bernice A. King, who is the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I told her where I was. And I told her what we were doing. And I said, do you have anything you'd like to say? And the only response she wrote back was, tell them to fight. Tell them to fight. Now, this is a conversation about extremism. I think it's interesting, and I didn't know this when I got here. This was all new to us when we arrived. We picked it up as we got here. But as you talk about Dr. King's Nobel Peace Prize of December 1964, you should be very proud of making that decision. I actually think about Dr. King in April of 1963, which is now the 53rd anniversary of Letter from a Birmingham Jail. It's not well known. It's not nearly as well known as I Have a Dream. It's probably the most important thing he ever wrote. And 8 prominent priests in Birmingham, Caucasian priests, very well respected, wrote a letter after he was jailed for marching for freedom and said, you are an extremist and you are a nuisance and you are breaking the law. And you are unwelcome here, you are uninvited. And he responded and said, first of all, injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. And my brothers are here, and my sisters are here in this city feeling injustice. And so I must be here to address injustice. And then he said, it strikes me that to break an unjust law is not only not unlawful, it is actually the calling of every moral being. To break an unjust law is a calling of every moral being. Or to quote his daughter, who did not know I was going to quote her father, fight. Tell him to fight for what's right. And so Dr. King went on, and he felt a little uncomfortable about Thomas. He felt uncomfortable about being called an extremist. He was really a moderate in that day in the movement. And as I sort of wrap this up, I'm going to actually quote what Dr. King actually said when he was called an extremist, as we talk about extremism here in the broader context. But though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Was not Martin Luther, for which he was named, an extremist for the drum major instinct? So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate? Or as Pekka has become an expert on, extremists for love? Will we be an extremist for the preservation of injustice or for the existence of justice? King addressed the accusations from the civil rights movement that they were extreme. First disputing the label, but then accepting it, as I just noted. He then went on to say, so the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? He then discussed how President Eisenhower would not meet with the civil rights leaders because he said in order to do that, he also had to meet with the Ku Klux Klan. I'm going to repeat that. The President of the United States of America at that time said in moderation, if I met with the civil rights leaders, I would also have to meet, in fairness, with the Ku Klux Klan. And so King expressed general frustration with both white moderates and certain opposing forces in the Negro community. He wrote that white moderates, including clergymen, pose a challenge comparable to that of white supremacists, in the sense that shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright injustice and rejection. King asserted that the white church needed to take a principled stand of risk being dismissed as an risk being dismissed as an irrelevant social club regarding the black community. King wrote that we need not follow the do-nothingism of the complacent nor the hatred and despair of the black nationalist. And so today you really have three choices. You're going to be an extremist, this is me talking now, an extremist for good. You can be an extremist for evil, which I'm sure were talking about when somebody wise brought this phrase and topic up. You can also, though, be an extremist for nothingness. Now, Pekka, Ambassador Andrew Young, who's Dr. King's aide in the civil rights movement, has often articulated the strategy that they move forward. It reminds me of something you said earlier today, Pekka. You said that basically that the only thing that stops hatred and bigotry and bad people is for good people to do nothing. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially I think that's what you said. And so I'm going to leave you as I sort of positively challenge you to do really what you've been doing tonight. No one needs to give you a lecture about what to do in Norway. You're one of the greatest nations in the world today. I've been to 100 countries, and I know a little bit about those who do and those who don't do. You've got the coolest crown prince on the planet, by the way. With the finest wife. And he's going to get criticized if he doesn't do nothing and chooses to do something. As a nation, you're going to get criticized if you decide to do something instead of doing nothing. So here's my final 2-minute poem. No, it's actually 1 minute. To the crazy ones. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. They have no respect for the status quo. You can praise them, disagree with them, quote them, disbelieve them, glorify them, or vilify them. About the only thing you cannot do is to ignore them, because they change things. They invent, they imagine, they heal, they explore, they create, and they inspire. They push the human race forward. Maybe they have to be crazy. How else can you stare at an empty canvas and see a work of art? Or sit in silence and hear a song that's never been written? Or gaze at a red planet and see a laboratory on wheels? While some see these people as the crazy ones, others see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to believe they can change the world are the ones who usually do. Now, that was not written by some great philosopher whose name I can't pronounce. That's an inside joke. It was not written by a prophet. It does not come from the Bible or the Quran. It does not come from some vaulted place. It was written by a businessman, by an entrepreneur. It was written by an immigrant, the child of a migrant. It was written by a Syrian, somebody who, if certain people were allowed to be president of the United States, would not be allowed in the United States. That guy, that person, was Steve Jobs, without which we'd have rock, paper, scissors today. So I just challenge you to think differently, to reimagine everything, to be bold, because the Bible suggests this: be hot or be cold, because if you're lukewarm, I'll spat you out. Translation: even God does not like mediocrity. Good night.